you are good at that, you speak a wonderful prose. If you are really good, you can be a poet. Architecture belongs to the epoch, not even to the time, as we say, to a real epoch. That is the essence of the epoch, and that is the only thing we really can express. You have to construct something. You can make a garage out of it, or you can make a cathedral out of it. The same means, the same structural methods we use.
The idea was always we have to do something together. We have to pull the whole thing together. We have to destroy these separations between painting and sculpture and architecture and design and so on. It's all one.
If I understood that, I would not be professional in architecture. I would look for more profound principles.
The final aim of the Bauhaus for me was architecture. So there's only one person I think he could really do it. That is Mies van der Rohe. Fortunately, he accepted to take over the institute. And he again, from his own personal point of view, went much stronger into the architectural department and built up a new curriculum for architecture in the institute. But very soon came the end of it, the Nazis destroyed it. He had to move away from Dessau to Berlin, and very provisionally only he put it up in an old factory in Berlin. And after a very short while, the Nazis closed the house and he couldn't go on.
Most beautiful, the best building in New York, the Washington Bridge. You know, that grew. First, I had to conquer the idea, and later I appreciated it as a duty. Thomas Aquinas, he says, reason is the first principle of all human work. Under the influence of science and technology, I would ask myself, what can that be, What result comes from this fact, Can we change it or can we not change it? And the answer of this question, gives me the direction which I follow, not what I like. I throw often things out I like very much. They are dear to my heart. But when I have a better conviction, a better idea, clearer idea by that, then I follow the clearer idea.
The man, when he lives progressively very far utopian, then when he's getting old, he's still fresh enough and young enough from the point of view of the others looking at him.
Now, when you have grasped that once, then you act accordingly. So I would throw everything out, but it's not this. I don't want to be interested. I want to be good.
Okay, you probably see this screen. It's a PDF, and I just want to talk with you about these few lines that he himself wrote. He said, I do not oppose form, but only form as a goal. And I do this as the result of a number of experiences and the insight I have gained from them. So again, he is not opposing form, but he is opposing form as a goal. Form as a goal always ends in formalism. For this, striving is directed not towards an inside, but towards an outside. But only a living inside has a living outside. Only intensity of life has intensity of form. Every how is carried by a what. The unformed is not worse than the overformed. The former is nothing, the latter is mere appearance. Real form presupposes real life, but not something that has already existed, nor something thought out. Here lies the criterion. We do not evaluate the result, but the starting point of the creative process. For me, it is very important that he says the unformed is not worse than the overformed. So what is the unformed? Something that doesn't yet have a form. And what is the overformed is something that has too much form. And they are both not good in his opinion. He's probably right. So what counts, Mies says, is life, the intensity of life. And a life which is oriented towards or starts from the inside, not from the outside. You know, to put it simply, maybe this means that, you know, unless you feel something deeply within, you cannot express it outside because it's not inside. It has to be inside. Okay, enough about this. Now I will begin with, as I said, with someone who would surprise you because, you know, not too many years after he died, after Mies died, here we have in California an architect who is so very different from from what he was. And I just chose Eric Owen Moss. I could have chosen others, but I chose an American architect who lives and works on the west side and of the United States, and who represents in a way the very opposite of Mies van der Rohe. So after I show kind of quickly, because he deserves more attention, but you'll see enough images with his work, we'll move to the big presentation on Mies van der Rohe. And after Mies, I will also show some kind of a reaction to him, Ricardo Bofill. Now, you know buildings by Mies. I wonder what Mies would have thought of something like this, or something like this, or something like this even. You know, probably for Mies would have been very difficult to comprehend because he was looking for some kind of a clarity, although what Eric Owen Moss does is not, it appears to be very, very different from what Mies did, but he is also concerned with the life within that is expressed outwardly. He built a lot in Culver City on the west coast of the United States. I like to think that somehow what he does for Culver City coincides with what Palladio did for Vicenza. And by the way of Palladio, on Wednesday, August 19th, we'll pay homage to Andrea Palladio. This is Eric Owen Moss. He's still alive and involved with a school, SciArc in Los Angeles, which is a very important architecture school. He's not really a deconstructivist, although he might have certain elements that one might consider being a deconstructivist. This is a fine tower and it's fine also at night. This is a project for Moscow, I think, for an opera or a theater, the big theater in Moscow. He didn't win, I think, but this was his project. Again, if we, and we'll arrive at Mies very soon, you'll see the difference. You will also see the difference here. This kind of architectural snake probably would have been inconceivable at the time when Mies worked, or this kind of so-called detail. But we live in a different time, and as Mies van der Rohe said, and he said it correctly, architecture has to represent its epoch. And, you know, Erik Cohen Moss represents our time. So we cannot build today as Mies built 6 years ago or 8 years ago, because it's a different time. We have a different kind of life. We have different worries, different problems, different technologies. So many things are different. Yes, a continuum does exist because we are still human as he was human. And, you know, essentially we are not very different, but society is different, technology is different, our concerns are different. So there are things that changed and there are things that didn't change. So maybe in contrast with what is happening today, and of course not every architecture today looks like Erik Cohen Moss, but I took him as representing, you know, kind of a personal and intense position in architecture that is also represented to an extent by other architects as well. You see, we don't believe any longer in the vertical and the horizontal because our world is much less stable. Not that his world was very stable. After all, it went through the Second World War. But the kind of dislocations and disjunctions that we are facing, he didn't yet face, perhaps. So we live in a different time. I know in the schools of architecture, traditionally, Mies is considered some kind of a god, but that god, beyond his genuine importance and value, might not be so appropriate for our time because the paradigm changed. We don't believe any longer in reason in as much as he did. I mean, this kind of, you know, sponge, architectural sponge, this kind of architectural animal, this kind of porosity probably would have been inconceivable at the time Mies lived and worked. Or this kind of tower, you know, this, you know, swirling tower. He built a lot, several skyscrapers, Mies van der Rohe, and you are going to see them, but not like this, not spiraling, not swirling. Here is Erik Cohen Moss, across is Frank Gehry. They both are involved at SciArc very much. Okay. This is just a short introduction in the work of Erik Cohen Moss, and then we'll compare Mies with him and with, as I said, with Ricardo Bofill. Because I think comparative architecture is good because you can situate a phenomenon in a larger context, and through comparisons, you can perhaps understand better the subject of your interest. Now I go to Mies himself. And then at the end, we'll talk about Ricardo Bofill and his relationship with Mies van der Rohe. Okay, I don't know if you know, but he changed his name. Mies was his family name from his father. So it's not his first name. Rohe, on the other hand, is the name of his mother before she got married. Now, because he was born in approximately in modest circumstances. His father ran a carving stone atelier. In a way, he was a stonemason, or he worked with stone. He was a craftsman and a tradesman. And Mies had aspirations to become an aristocrat. And so he wanted to use VAN, like Ludwig van Beethoven, but the Germans didn't allow him to do that, because in Germany you truly need to be to have a nobility in your biography in order to do that. So he settled for the Dutch form, Van der. So his name now became Mies van der Rohe. Again, Rohe is the last name of his mother before she got married to Mr. Mies. Another interesting thing is that the word Mies means lousy. And this is very interesting, because here you have a man who wanted to be, an aristocrat through his name, but he kept his first name, which actually means lousy. So it's some kind of a contradiction here, Hello? Please be kind and turn off the microphones, because there is a background noise. Thank you. So it's almost like saying, his name translates into something like the lousy nobleman. And this is kind of interesting. And I even launched myself a competition with this title, A House for Lousy van der Rohe. Anyway, he was a man obsessed by perfection. He wanted to do, as he said, I don't want to be interesting, I want to be good. And the way he pronounced the word good was truly very, very convincing in the video that we just watched. He didn't study architecture, but because he had talent in drawing, he was able to begin to work in architecture offices. And he entered the office of Peter Behrens, a very important German architect, where he had colleagues like Walter Gropius and Le Corbusier. They all three of them worked in the same office for Peter Behrens. And then slowly he began to have, to make a name for himself, and he began to build. So much so and so well that, he built the Barcelona pavilion 1 year before Walter Gropius invited him to become the director of the Bauhaus. So, but he was over 45 by then, but he made a name for himself as the best avant-garde architect in Germany at that time. So this is the gentleman. He was also quite successful, not just in the field of architecture, but also in the field of ruining the hearts of beautiful women. He was a seducer. He had a number of children with various ladies, and yeah, the successful architect usually does this, and so did Mies. But in this picture, we see a man who is serious and intense, and maybe even a little bit, not morose, but maybe even a little bit with a touch of pessimism. He drew very well indeed, and very poetically, and very lyrically. And what is very interesting is that this man, as you know his architecture, you know how he built. You would expect him to love art that was minimalist and discreet, with thin lines and straight lines. He actually loved the paintings of Paul Klee, the great Swiss painter who died at 60, and they were colleagues at the Bauhaus. Paul Klee was teaching there. And so Mies van der Rohe in his Chicago apartment, had displayed on the white walls of his apartment paintings, very, very poetical, beautiful paintings by Paul Klee. And this shows again that Mies was at heart a poet. And as Frank Lloyd Wright said, a great architect is a poet by definition. And I agree with Wright. Mies was a poet. Not necessarily in the sense that he wrote poems with words, but he wrote poems with a material specific to architecture. This is his gravestone, very simple and in a way, you know, appropriate for a man like him. This is an early work when he was rather expressionistic. He was in Germany. Is a monument for Rosa Luxemburg, and you know, it's in brick, but he used brick in his early works, and at times quite convincingly. Some, like Kenneth Frampton, regret that he gave up that period in his work, because at that time he was a little bit more maybe stylistically less pure, but there was more richness perhaps, and yeah, I would say that that might be the case, but you know, he evolved towards you know, his specific ideals in architecture, and gave up you know, some of the, I would say, the qualities of his beginnings. But on the other hand, Walter Gropius himself at the beginning was an expressionist, at least to an extent. And so, you know, maybe it has also something to do with the time, you know, that the more we advanced towards the Second World War and then beyond, the more we advanced into modernity. But I still think this earlier period in Mies' life and work is interesting and important from an architectural point of view. Now you'll see a work that is very nationalistic. Of course, it's a monument for Bismarck, and was not built, but it's, you know, it's Egyptian in spirit. It's colossal. It's indeed a monument. You know, a monument to a monumental political figure, Bismarck. And this was the perspective drawing, the drawing of Mies van der Rohe. Now this is you know, it's a, you know, a more recent sculpture of him. This is, we'll go for the works chronologically, but I just have a few images at the beginning to show you a variety of his works. This is a chapel. He even built a chapel, and is part of the Illinois Institute of Technology campus. I mean, where the Institute of the Illinois Institute of Technology is, and the Crown Hall, the celebrated building by Mies. Now I'll show you some drawings by him. His drawings are very, you know, they are just suggestions, but they show the poet in him. The poet in him expressing himself graphically. So he's not an illustrator, although you saw that perspective for the monument of Bismarck. It was quite well done. But in his preliminary sketches, he explores ideas and a certain conception of space, and he does so quite lyrically and in a suggestive way. We already have the form of you know, conceiving space that that belongs to him. Anyone would say that yes, this is a plan by Mies van der Rohe. But you know, his sketches show a variety of approaches, and I like his sketches. I think they are indeed they do show talent, even if they are modest sketches and they are not made to impress. They are sketches made for himself as a way of studying. I like this drawing very much. It's that more that he aspired towards with less. The problem with less is more is that his buildings, indeed, the more refined they became, the more they meant architecturally, but they also, their cost increased. So it's almost like a paradox, because when you say less is more, this doesn't refer to the investment, to the amount of money that the clients had to pay for his exercises in sublime purity. Here he uses actually an image from Paul Klee, which I mentioned. That painting is by Paul Klee. He does these collages, very simple, you know, but very evocative. Here too, but he uses Picasso. Obviously, you have a lover of art. He was an architect. He didn't paint, as far as I know, as opposed to, for example, Le Corbusier and other architects like Mackintosh, and many architects paint. Mies didn't paint, but you can tell he loved and loves art. And of course he loved and loves art, because it's impossible to have an architect who doesn't love art. It's just impossible. In as much as it is impossible to think that architecture is not an art. Well, if it's not an art, why is it present in almost all histories of art? I have seen many, many books, and all histories of art, or almost all of them, have architecture in its pages, in their pages, and often from the very beginning. So those who say it's not an art, then I ask, well, why is then architecture present in the so many histories of art of the world? And you can take any history of science, and architecture is not there. So why is it that it's not there? It uses science. Of course, science is connected with architecture, but at its best, architecture is an art. Okay, so a few other sketches by him, and he also did, you know, collages of this sort. But you can tell in all of them there is a thinker, and in all of them there is a poet, and in all of them there is an artist, or someone, a lover of art. Now, this is a project he did for Berlin, for a skyscraper, and it's a very fine drawing, and it was not built, but it shows already his capacity to envision the new in a very evocative way. You see the plan on the right. You wouldn't expect this, knowing the, you know, the later works by Mies. You would not expect this kind of plan, but he did it. Yes, if it was built, it would have been a great tower, no doubt. This is another, the one at the bottom. You see, he proposed two. The one also at the bottom, you know, could surprise you because of the fluid curved perimeter line. Is this one. Now here there is something strange. If you look at the scale of the trees, no tree is taller than you know, almost 3 times, almost 2-3 times taller than a building with about 4 floors. So you know, architects sometimes in the renderings they don't respect truth. Le Corbusier did it sometimes too. So here, you know, you cannot have a tree which is 12 floors high, 15 floors high. Anyway, this doesn't take away from the merits of the project. This is the plan. And when you see this plan, you would say, wait a minute, this cannot be Mies. Well, it is Mies. It was Mies. But he gave up this form of doing architecture. But it is amazing, no, that now that when he was a little bit younger, he thought of this kind of plan. You know, if you do something like this today, you would say, yes, it belongs to our time. But he did it, you know, before the Second World War. Early works, I mean, built works. The Haus Real in Berlin, this is, of course, very traditional. He began with houses that are not very, you know, innovative yet, but they were anchored in the traditions and culture of his country at that time. Were well built. Even when he worked for Peter Behrens, he was acting as some kind of a construction manager. In fact, when Behrens built Germany's embassy in St. Petersburg, the construction manager of the project was Mies van der Rohe. Another house in Berlin. It's a long distance. I would understand the very possible puzzlement from this period in his life to his later works. Haus Wolf, also, you know, very, you know, in a way, very, very conformist. But you saw that skyscraper just a few images before. He had something else in mind as well. Haus Urbig. He built several houses that, but Le Corbusier himself built when he was young a few houses that you wouldn't say, you know, were his. Now we are moving slowly, or maybe not so slowly, towards modernism in an explicit way. And here it is already a very resolutely modern house. Yes, he uses a lot of brick. You might say it looks more like a school than a house, or it seems to have a public dimension that is a little bit in contradiction with the idea of intimacy or home. But he was on his way towards a more radical understanding of what modernity means. Another house in Berlin, also on his way towards becoming himself, meaning Mies van der Rohe. I don't know if at this time he already changed his name. I think he's changed his name in around 1929 or so. Not so early, just before he became the director of the Bauhaus, which happened in 1930. Maybe you know, the Bauhaus had three directors. One was Walter Gropius, who was also the founder from 1999 to, I think, 1926. Then from 1926 to 1930 was Hans Meyer, but he was replaced by Mies because apparently Hans Meyer, you know, induced in the Bauhaus students some kind of a Bolshevism. You know, he was radically oriented towards Soviet Union, and the students began to have a similar positioning in terms of their ideology. So then, you know, those responsible with the administration of the school decided to replace him with Mies van der Rohe. But unfortunately, Mies couldn't do much because the times were difficult. So he was a director of the Bauhaus from 1930 to 1933, when the school dissolved, and then he immigrated to the United States. because of the political entanglements, and the school just ended, the famous school. But the Bauhaus continued in the States. In fact, in Chicago, there was a new Bauhaus, which was ran by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was a colleague in the faculty of the Bauhaus with Mies, and one in Ulm, that one perhaps a little bit less important, but the one in Chicago, very interesting school itself, which lasted for a number of years, 15 years or so, until Moholy died. But back to Germany and this, I mean, as you can tell, Mies was already changing kind of with speed, and the change is radical. I mean, just remember a few images earlier, those houses with sloping roofs. And here we are, the same man, the same architect, the same country, the same culture, maybe a few years later, but that's it. So he embraced modernity with speed and never looked back. This is a project for a country house, and here we are, is one step away from the pavilion in Barcelona. He was obviously concerned with essentials. I mean, look at his drawing. It's just essentials. You have no more, no less. Now, the famous Tugendhat villa in Brno, this is one of his masterpieces. I don't know though if I have, well, I have a few images that I have a better resolution. There are books published just about this building, and it's not yet, that very, very refined Mies, but is Mies at his best nevertheless. But try to remember, if you want, that we began with Erika and Moss, and look at these houses and try to remember what Moss is doing now, or did, for the past 10, 15, 20 years. The world is changed, no doubt. I mean, yes, you can still build like this, like Mies did, but at the same time, there are architects who build like Erika and Moss does. So how do you explain this? Something happened to our world. On the other hand, you saw that Mies himself, earlier in his life, had that plan with curved lines, fluid lines for that skyscraper. So maybe nothing truly new is nothing new in the world. It's always some kind of transformation, but there are also things that connect. We're still in Brno at Tugendhat house. Whiteness, of course, whiteness, just like in the case of Villa Savoie. A lot of whiteness. He said that he was against fashion, and I believe it's true. He was concerned with essentials, with truth, with the matters more serious than fashion. Yet, you cannot totally dismiss fashion, because there are trends, there are, maybe we shouldn't call them fashion, but there is a spirit of the time. And I do believe that the great French poet Charles Baudelaire was right when he said, art has two halves. One half speaks about what is ephemeral, transitory, circumstantial, in other words, fashion. And the other half speaks about the immutable, the permanent, the unchanging, the eternal. And it needs both halves. I mean, everything is you know, magnificently coherent here. You know, even the, you know, the technical drawings, they show a very serious concern with the integrity of the building. And so it doesn't matter, you know, you analyze in detail or in as a whole the building. The building is convincing at all levels, as it should be. Now we arrive at the Barcelona pavilion, which, you know, it was rebuilt in 1986. So, you know, the one that he built was destroyed, and then they rebuilt it in 1986. The Catalans rebuilt it. Well, some architects, and we'll arrive at Ricardo Bofill, felt that this kind of aesthetics is problematic because it's too pure, too, you know, abstract, too, in a way, you know, it could give the impression that it's too simple. I mean, let's think about less is more, you know. Frank Lloyd Wright, for example, said less is more only when more is not good enough. And I think he was right. I myself wrote a short kind of like a haiku, only 4 lines, where I was asking myself about less and more. And I said like this: many times less is less. A few times less is more. Many times more is less. A few times more is more. Because, for example, there is great Baroque architecture, no, or even Rococo architecture. And in the best examples of Baroque architecture, for example, more is more, it's not less. On the other hand, a lot of architecture that appears to work with less is more is actually less. Mies had genius. With his genius, he was able to do more with less. But there are many other architects with less gifted than him who use the same, you know, motto or credo, or call it what you want, and they didn't achieve the results that Mies achieved. So in the hands of a less gifted architect, less is not more, but less is less. In as much as there is a lot of architecture where more is less, it doesn't mean that if you amplify the, you know, the turmoil of architectural expression, you become, you realize something that in terms of quality is more. It doesn't mean that. That's why only a few buildings where there is excess are very, very good. But on the other hand, there are many opulent buildings that are not good, that are mediocre, in as much as there are many buildings that use this phrase, less is more, and in fact, in their case, less is less.
Then one observation I wanted to ask you about, if you see in this Barcelona pavilion, if this Italian marble was not there, it would not look so great. If the stainless steel columns were not there, it wouldn't look so great. So in this architecture which uses less, they tend to use more expensive material. That is my observation. I don't know how far it's true. What do you say?
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. When you reduce to an extreme the architectural language, you have to have very high quality materials. Otherwise, you know, the building looks poor. So yes, he you know, minimized, you know, to a large extent the architectural language, but he increased the you know, the value of the materials that he used. And yeah, your observation is totally correct. Yeah, if you don't work with equally noble materials, you don't get the same result. Because look at this marble. I mean, this marble is, you know, I mean, you know, you would say Mies didn't use ornaments, but he didn't have to, because nature used ornaments. Look at the marble, it's magnificent. But this is not wall covering, this is marble. So you can imagine the cost of this wall. So that's why some critics say, well, less is more, but it's more only because less is actually not at all levels less. In fact, some of these buildings built with less is more actually cost a lot. And look at the other wall there, you know, there is another, you know, there I would say more is more. I mean, there is a wall where, you know, yes, it's a simple geometry. It's just a, you know, a rectangle, a wall, but in terms of the richness and the value of the wall, it's an expensive wall. Look at it. So, you know, the phrase, somebody, a critic in Chicago told me, you know, Mies used to say less is more because he didn't know English very well. So I don't know if it's true. It's maybe just a joke, but that's what I was told. That he learned kind of with difficulty English, and at the beginning he didn't know English, so he kept saying less is more because he only used a few words. But no, I think he referred to his way of doing architecture. But as Vatsal said, if you look at this wall and then the wall behind the sculpture there, you know, you actually see a Baroque wall. It is a Baroque wall in terms of ornamentation. It doesn't matter, the geometry of the wall is simple.
In fact, Dan, this was, I think, rebuilt. So they took the old drawings. I don't know if they had photographs. If you go back one slide to that wall, which is orangish, yeah, this wall looks good because that rectangle is on the right hand side. If it was in the center, it wouldn't look very nice. The composition looks good because that rectangle is on the right hand side. It is off center and it's not a typical centric design composition. So I think these are inputs by other architects also, besides Mies. I don't know. What do you say?
I didn't think about this, but it's an interesting comment. But I imagine there were photographs because it was, you know, famous. It was very successful, this pavilion, and you know, at that time there were photographs, of course. But I think they rebuilt it very accurately. And but again, you know, this is not an arte povera building. This is a rich building, and to an extent, it doesn't respect the so-called less is more. But all his buildings are expensive. You know, they are not. You know, these are not. You know, inexpensive exercises in modesty. No. To arrive at this level of refinement, you need to intensify actually the creative process and to ask the client to pay for this intensification accordingly. He was, in his aspirations, he was an aristocrat. So his founder, Rohe, I guess, was deserved. Anyway, there are all kinds of studies about this building. There are books written about this building, and you know, as you can tell here, you know, it's amazing what analysts discover. Or anyway, that chair is also by him. yes, a splendid material. You know, nature does provide wonders, it's true. Because nature doesn't act and doesn't think in these terms, less is more. No, nature is abundantly herself in astonishingly, you know, overwhelming richness of manifestations. Now, so after 1933, when the Bauhaus dissolved, he crossed the ocean together with Gropius and Marcel Breuer. But Gropius and Marcel Breuer went to Harvard, so they remained on the East Coast, while Mies went to Chicago. And there he started his glorious activity in Chicago. And in my opinion, his effects on the city are a little bit debatable. Although he built great buildings in Chicago, some of his greatest. Chicago was very generous with him, and you know, it's almost impossible to conceive of Mies without Chicago. But I think something happened to Chicago, and you can tell Chicago now is a city torn apart between its past, meaning you know, Sullivan and Wright, and not just them. There were other important architects, and the aesthetics brought from Europe to the States by Mies. Now, this is, of course, the famous Fansworth house built for a client with whom he fell in love for a while, from what I understood. You know, people think that his architecture is international style and it's kind of connected with functionalism. Well, not really. I mean, you wouldn't really say that this is a functionalist building. This elevating the building from the earth is problematic. Yes, it looks good, but even in the case of a flood, in fact, it was flooded several times. In fact, I lived there for 6 years and I never saw it, because when I was there, when I decided to go, it was flooded, it couldn't be visited. The water came above the level of the first slab and entered the house. So yeah, it's a pure statement, it's a manifesto of great purity, but I wonder if one wouldn't be intimidated by living in such a building, you know, and not everything is perfect. For example, you see the kitchen there. And at the kitchen, when you work at the sink or the stove or the working table, you are with your back towards the light, towards the outside. And I don't think it's the perfect thing. I mean, I'm not a functionalist, but I don't think it's so pleasant to, especially when the landscape is so beautiful, you know, you work there with your back towards it. Plus, you know, again, I hate to be prosaic, and I usually am not, hopefully, but you know, what is happening underneath the house? You know, someone has to clean up there, because in time, you know, there are winds, there are all kinds of things going underneath. And, you know, the great purist, the great stylist, Mies van der Rohe, you know, really think about this, you know. Someone has to torture himself or herself to go underneath the building and clean up, because in time there would be a mess there. And what do you do here? Because here you can't get underneath because there isn't enough space, but things accumulate there. So, you know, not everything is perfect here. I mean, sorry to to lower the level of the discussion so dangerously, but you know, there are problems. You know, with these great statements of great purity, yes, it's an architectonic poem, and it deserves its glory, but I still think there are some problems. It's almost like architecture wanted to turn against itself. Because when you simplify and simplify and simplify and reduce, you know, you arrive at, you are moving in the direction of almost nothingness. And this is a metaphysical situation in a way. I think in a strange way, perhaps, and paradoxically, Mies was amplifying his intensity of involvement with architecture by moving in the opposite direction. You know, reduce, like in some examples also now of Ishigami. Ishigami, in some of his earlier works, also tried to almost get rid of architecture in even more radical ways than Mies. Maybe you know that Ishigami at the Venice Biennial, he had an installation some years ago, I don't know, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, and it was so reduced to nothingness, in fact, that a cat that entered the pavilion destroyed the whole installation because the cat didn't see it and maybe didn't even feel it. It was just something extremely unobservable. And yes, this is what Ishigami himself declared, that the cat destroyed the installation. Yet he got the Golden Lion for that incredible reductionism. But the reductionism began, you know, with Mies, although he was much less radical, of course. Now you see the water. The water is entering the famous villa. So this is a problem. When the architect is a poet, sometimes in the name of poetry, ignores certain things, you know, the winds, the climate, the level of humidity, you know, the floods and so on, because, I mean, he elevated his building, but I imagine that if he made some research, he would have learned that in this area there are floods where the water goes to dangerously high levels. This is a beautiful picture, it's true. It is beautiful. It is, you know, it is magnificent. But it's also magnificent because of nature. It is a great picture, yes. And you have man and nature, or nature and man, or, you know, in a beautiful embrace. It's a love story here between nature and man and nature. I'm not so convinced, to be honest with you, about this ending here. I understand it's not a perfect symmetry, but somehow this ending here seems to me a little bit abrupt of the building. I can't explain very well why. Maybe I need to spend more time studying the plan and so on, but there it seems to be not sufficiently open. Like, for example, Villa Capra by Palladio or Villa Rotonda, it opens in all directions simultaneously and equally convincing. Here, in that part, in that corner, is a very different situation than here. Although in terms of nature, you have the same kind of nature, trees to the left, trees to the right. So I don't know about this. Anyway, here I am, a professor who is never satisfied with what the students did. Well, he's not the student, of course. Otherwise, great assemblage of architectural elements. He was not just a great architect, but also a great builder. And this is also shown in his furniture designs, which have been built. I don't know who these people are. Anyway, I'm sure the building is visited very often. Well, it also influenced Philip Johnson, who built his own glass house. Not much later, maybe you know that, but Philip Johnson, I mean, Mies and Philip Johnson collaborated because when Mies arrived in the States, he didn't have the right for signature. So he was commissioned to do the Sigrum Building in New York. And it was Philip Johnson who signed for Mies van der Rohe. Now, it seems there was also some involvement of Mies with the Nazis in Germany, and so was Philip Johnson involved. So there are books about this. You know, I didn't read them, but I have seen one or two books. It's not very clear because he was also at war with the administration and with the political authority in Germany at that time. But there are some studies saying that Mies was not totally exempt from some kind of relation with the Nazis. I don't know, but Philip Johnson was an architect who that there are documents saying that he tried to bring Nazis to the United States, and he was very involved. Anyway, you see here, you know, we make our beautiful architectural poem, but you see the rust, because yes, this is the tragedy with architecture. You know, the elements affect the building, and it's very difficult to remain very pure. Sorry, to remain very pure, and at the same time to resist the confrontation with the actions of time, of weather, of the elements. And you know, many buildings that have been built, you know, more recently, you know, they need refurbishments continuously. They need to be repaired, you know, like the house, the School of Architecture in Cincinnati by Peter Eisenman had to be, you know, repaired after 20 years with a big investment. And, you know, the same the Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright, when I visited it, they were collecting money to have extensive and expensive repair works because the building was collapsing in the area where the Falling Water was. And so La Tourette, and you know, modern architects, in the name of purity and in the name of space and in the name of innovation, they didn't build really very carefully, many times. Now this is probably the client laying on the sofa here. You know, when you sleep, it doesn't matter where you sleep. You just sleep, and you could sleep in a poor studio in a block of flats built by the communists, or you can you know, sleep in the Fansworth house, or in Villa Rotonda. During the sleep, we are all equal, I guess. Anyway, it is a great building, and you see the master architect conducting his boat around the house. You saw the curtains being you know, brought up because you know, the building is attacked by the high you know, rising levels of water. I thought of making, you know, one day to attack a subject that would be titled kind of like architecture and dirt, because we don't think enough about dirt, you know, but dirt exists. Dirt is part of life, and it's even part of the psychological life. So the relationship between architecture and dirt, I'm looking at this again, at this platform here, this slab. You know, and I wonder, did Mies think at all about what happens underneath? you know, I don't think he did.
Dan, I was studying the dimensions and I found that he's repeated 22 feet many times if you see it in the rectangle. I don't know whether there was something like the golden rule applied here. If you see 22 feet, it's a module in the vertical columns as well as in that platform which forms the open terrace. That's also 22 feet. I don't know if there was any proportionating system or something in this, like the golden rule of Corbusier.
I don't know. I mean, in the case of Le Corbusier, it was explicit, but here, I don't know. I only see 22 once, actually, or twice. I don't know. Maybe he used some kind of, you know, system. I don't know.
Okay.
But again, in the name of purity, I personally, and again, you know, I'm far from being, you know, a man careful about these matters. But I wouldn't like really to be, you know, in this kitchen where I am with my back towards a glass wall, towards which I could see a beautiful forest. And I'm actually, because yes, when you work there, you work with the back to nature. And I don't know. Anyway, maybe it's not important. But this drawing is beautiful. I mean, in terms of aesthetics, I look at this drawing and it's, I feel, I'm sorry that I have to use this word, which is probably problematic, meaning genius, but I feel genius in this very, very simple drawing. I feel in the hesitation, in the modesty, because it's a very modest drawing. But I don't know, the kind of sensitivity in the drawing that he showed is very dear to me. Not this one. This one was done later on by someone using a computer. Anyway, Crown Hall. This building I have seen. I have been there. I was once invited to be part of a jury, you know, for the students there, because the architecture school is there in the Crown Hall, the Illinois Institute of Technology. And I have to tell you, when I left this building, and I so regretted I didn't have a camera, but I turned my back. Anyway, we'll arrive there. I'm just telling you now the story. When I left the building and I turned my head to take another look at the building, and it was the sunset, and the way the sun touched the platform in front of the entrance door had a great impact on me. I truly regretted I didn't have a camera. I had a feeling it was some kind of an altar, and you will see pictures with it. Inside, yes, it's a huge space, and you know, all the students are there together in one large space, and not so aligned the tables any longer as when this picture was taken. I'm talking about this platform here. He's very good at this. So when I left, it was about, I don't know, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., and the sunlight was coming from the left, and the way it touched this, I really had the feeling it was almost like an altar. It was very, very, very beautiful. Yeah, the School of Architecture of Illinois Institute of Technology is right here in this building, the Crown Hall. He designed other buildings in this campus, including the master plan. That chapel that we saw at the beginning is also part of the campus. He also designed the master plan for Weissenhof in Stuttgart, and will arrive at that building too, at that campus, and at his building as well. But this being said, we'll arrive when we end the presentation on Mies to Ricardo Bofill. and we'll see a very different kind of architecture, which is not less legitimate. You probably know, but Mies van der Rohe wanted to make of modernism a style, just as classicism was, or the Gothic, a style that would impose itself with the same authority. But I think here there was a problem, because the very essence of modernity is somehow against the stability and the permanence that a style normally has. You know, modernity in its very essence means continuous change and hybridity and impurity even, and fashion even. So I understand the nobility of his aspiration, but somehow there seems to be a contradiction. Why? Because the second one half of art, which refers to modernity, to what is modern, refers to what is ephemeral, circumstantial, transitory. But he tried to make that into something that is permanent. And that's why I think his effect on Chicago was a little bit restrictive, because it's too, it's like a dead-end street. It's perfect, it's beautiful, but you cannot advance from it. And I think this is what happened to Chicago. Chicago now, and had for a good number of years, was frozen by the very genius of Mies. It couldn't go beyond it, because it was a dead-end street. Beautiful, permanent, but unavoidable. And it needs a turmoil to turn things around. Yes, it's splendid. It is splendid, but it's a dead-end street. And that's what I think Ricardo Bofill understood. And that's why he said Magritte is more important for us than Mies, although Mies had without doubt genius. But he tried to impose his genius on the campus, on the students. Everyone was supposed to work kind of like this. And, a dead-end street is a dead-end street, even if it's a sublime street. So I think he was a little bit here doing a disservice to himself, particularly, I think, as an educator, because most of the people around him didn't have his gifts, didn't have his talent, didn't have his vision, and they applied some of the, the thoughts and even I don't want to use the word dogmas, but I'm afraid that some of them just took the form of what he wanted to say and not the spirit of what he wanted to say. And that's why we didn't have another Mies. I mean, even Rem Koolhaas kind of rebelled against Mies. In fact, not far away from this building is a subway station above the ground that Koolhaas built, and a very different spirit. And you can see it on the web. I don't have here a picture with it. The IIT chapel that we saw, I have been inside. It had even itself had a little bit of problems with a few bricks were falling, but otherwise, I guess a fine building. And I'm glad he built a chapel. And I'm glad Frank Lloyd Wright built 10 buildings, religious buildings. And Le Corbusier built 4. And Kahn built several. And Alvar Aalto built several. But how many of our stars today build chapels or churches? Frank Gehry didn't. Rem Koolhaas didn't. Zaha Hadid didn't. Bernard Tschumi didn't. So there is a difference, you know, in the classical Orthodox, if I can call it so, the classical modern architecture, the Orthodox modern architecture. People still had an interest in, I mean, you know, they built religious buildings. And in the 19th century, they would build even, you know, gravestones and so on. So you can see it's a deterioration of the spiritual side of life that is accelerating and intensifying. Today, you know, most of the important architects, or many of them, probably don't even think about building a church or a chapel. Or Wolf Prix did, the Martin Luther Church in, but it's a curious kind of church. And Stephen Hall did, yes, but there are many who didn't. Although it is probably true, and I do believe in what Auguste Rodin, the great French sculptor, did, and what Ingmar Bergman, the great film maker from Sweden, said, that initially art and religion were one, because art was a form of worshiping. And when they got separated, they both assessed that they both died. Religion died and art died when they divorced from each other. And now we are at this stage when, you know, we are free but kind of disoriented. And Ingmar Bergman even said something, I think, very appropriately and astutely. He said, today the artists are like little ants that, you know, myriad of ants, little ants that transport together with great effort the skin of the dead snake, being you know, religion or God. And because of their movement, the skin of the snake, or the dead snake, seems to be alive, but it is actually dead. Very interesting. And he considered himself one of those ants. They make the skin move, and you think that the snake is alive, but the snake is not alive. That's what he thought, and that's what Auguste Rodin said, and I believe in both. And of course, I believe in what Nietzsche said also. So it's a moment when, I mean, you know, we asserted more and more the position of man in the world, but the price was that we divorced ourselves from what sustained us for so many centuries and thousands of years. This is the subway station by Rem Koolhaas, which is not far away from the chapel and from Crown Hall. It stops here. So when you visit Chicago and you want to see the buildings by Mies, you get off at this subway station by Rem Koolhaas. Now, Chicago Federal Building, you know, the typical, very refined, you know, skyscrapers or tall office buildings by Mies. Yes, they are splendid, but there is a but, I think. Exactly their quality is also their limit, because you cannot go beyond this limit. It's very hard unless you destroy something, or you start in a very, very different way to build. You know, you could almost say this is a church. Well, here you have a sculpture by Alexander Calder, the great American engineer who became a sculptor. I admire him very much. But imagine this plaza without the sculpture. You know, would be rather, you know, heavy and gray and you know, and cold. Now the famous blocks of flats, Lakeshore Drive, 860, 880, those two towers there. I think he himself lived in one of these buildings. There is a picture with him on the terrace of the building. Yes, they are very fine, but yeah, here he is. No, he is in a different building. So maybe he didn't live in those towers. But I did see pictures in his apartment, and I said he had paintings by his friend, I imagine, Paul Klee, very, very beautiful and poetical. And I suggest to you, if you don't know the paintings of Paul Klee, to search for him, because he was truly a very, very, one of the best painters of the 20th century. Very different from Picasso, very, very modest. His works are small in size, but very poetical and very complex, and even some of them whimsical and lyrical, very interesting painter. I love Paul Klee. Unfortunately, Renzo Piano built a museum for Paul Klee, which I think doesn't really do justice to Paul Klee, because Paul Klee was an intimist. His paintings are very delicate, and his watercolors, and Renzo Piano built a very large museum, and somehow I think in a different spirit than the works of Paul Klee. This is my opinion. Anyway, this is the plan of the apartment building by Lakeshore Drive, on Lakeshore Drive by Mies. Not bad at all, you know. Yes, everything is perfect. I mean, look at this corner here, you know, the way the structure is, and it encloses, you know, the building, but it also it opens up, so it's both centrifugal and centripetal. Interesting. Now, the Sigrum Building in New York, which I mentioned to you that he didn't have the right to sign the project, so Philip Johnson signed the drawings for him. I myself did once a project. Unfortunately, I don't know if I had a picture with it. I proposed a meditation chapel for a competition in Japan just in front of this building. I wanted to do it kind of polemically. I had my own theory. That this building represented, you know, big corporations and big money and big, you know, speculative financial works. So I thought maybe a small gesture of purification. So I proposed a small chapel, meditation chapel in front of this. And I sent the drawing to Japan, but I had a photograph, but I don't know where it is. Anyway. Sigrum Building, it's an excellent building. It's very, very, it's an aristocratic building. It's compared to the other skyscrapers around, it is an aristocrat. You can tell. It deserves a Fander, you know. Maybe it should be called Fander Sigrum or something. But not Mies, because I told you Mies means lousy. Again, as Batzal said, and his observation is very correct, the materials he used are very noble and expensive. You know, yes, you reduce the means of expression, but you compensate through the richness of the materials that you use.
Dan, there was another observation, but I didn't want to interrupt you. If you see Lakeshore Drive apartments plan, you enter in the kitchen and dining hall, and the living room. The living room is placed where there is more glass. If you go one slide back than this, one slide before, yeah, here you enter into a space which is the kitchen and dining, and the drawing room is placed. If you see the right hand corner, drawing room is placed where there is more glass and view is there, while you enter through the kitchen and dining into the apartment. You check out any apartment, they all have entry through the dining.
Yes. So you think this is not correct, or?
No, I think it's been done purposefully so the drawing room gets a better view. Like though in a way it's not correct because you should be entering into the drawing room, but here you enter into a space where right side there is a kitchen or pantry kind of thing, and you are facing the dining table when you enter. And then when you enter inside, you come to the drawing room. So I think it's done purposefully so drawing room has a good view, more glass or something. This was one observation.
Okay, thank you. Um, so, uh, okay, this is the plan of this masterpiece in New York. The Sigrum Building is his only his only building in New York. It is true. It is very impressive. I mean, I look at the facade, I look at the plan, I look at everything, and it's just, you know, it's hard to comment negatively. It's not possible. Now, the Berlin National Gallery of Art, which you probably know, is another great building by him in Berlin. Well, I was hoping, yeah, this is the building. And you look at the structure, it's very, you know, I mean, you know, all architects want to fly, want to make the buildings give the feeling of freedom. And you can do that when you are somehow able to evoke or to suggest, you know, that the building is somehow escaping, at least in part, gravity. And here he does it with, you know, with just a few vertical structural elements, and you know the whole building is supported by them. It looks a little bit busy here. It's a little bit hard to see what is going on. Maybe I didn't choose the right drawings. Sorry about this, but I think the building is, the expression in the photograph is more accurate than these drawings. These were not done by him. I should take them out and replace them with the drawings done by him, if I can find them. Now, of course, there are all kinds of exhibitions here, you know, some more inspired than others, but the building is unchanging, and that's good. You see, this is a picture from, you know, around the time when it was built, and it's very, very powerful and very pure, and the structure is more than itself in a way. It almost becomes metaphysical. What you see here on the left is a building by Renzo Piano, but it's not so close. It appears close, but it's not so close to the National Gallery by Mies. This is an interesting exhibition within the building, but of course it is not, it's not the work of Mies. The columns are also very noble and very well designed. You know, they are not simplistic. It's not just, and they barely touch, you know, the roof. Now it's a very fine building. Now some furniture designs by him, and then we'll go to Ricardo Bofill just to see what the rebellious Ricardo did in reaction to Mies van der Rohe. He was also an excellent designer of furniture, and these pieces are still produced. by various, companies. And my suggestion to you is, try to design yourselves at least a chair or two, because it's a very good exercise. And maybe and I said this before, Mies said that sometimes at least a chair is more difficult to do than a skyscraper. And I believe it is true. It's not easy to design well a chair, but it's very rewarding and even therapeutical. A chair expresses your personality in a very deep way if you try to do it well. Now here is on the left Mies and on the right Rem Koolhaas. You see on the walls, sorry for the picture, it's very small, the watercolors or the little paintings by Paul Klee. Now here we see a discussion between Philip Johnson on the left and Mies on the right, and in the center, and then on the right is Miss Lambert, the client for the Sigrum Building, and she was young. Now I think she's still alive, runs the Centre d'Architecture in Montreal, quite an important institution in the field of architecture, and she's a great sustainer of architecture and architects. Anyway, here he is with the little artworks by Paul Klee on the walls. And, he's the master architect is very elegant and very alone, it seems. He had many affairs, but I don't think he had a family in his later years at all. Anyway, so here you can read a few things about this piece of furniture by him. So these pieces of furniture, here also you could apply that less is more, but these are again very expensive pieces of furniture, and if they are done properly and with the right materials as he, specified, you would have to pay a lot for this less is more. Okay, and now just to show you a reaction to Mies, I will show you what Ricardo Bofill did with his Taller de Arquitectura. Unfortunately, Ricardo Bofill used to be a very interesting architect when he was still in Catalonia, in Barcelona. But after he had a lot of success, he moved to Paris, and he began to build a lot in Paris and around Paris and in some other places. And France totally changed him. He became almost a neoclassicist. But what he did while in Barcelona, and based on what he said, that for him and Taller de Arquitectura, Magritte was more important than Mies, is, I think, very valuable. So he wrote, for us, Magritte is more important than Mies, that is Mies van der Rohe. Before I show you his and their works, I want to show you a few paintings by Magritte, because is this Magritte, he refers to the Surrealist, the Belgian Surrealist painter. This is a painting by Magritte. Now, there was no pandemic at that time, but now from today, I could think that maybe, something like this could work for us as well. Unfortunately, then sorry for the resolution here. And this is, a portrait in the sky in a way. Magritte was very whimsical. He's considered a Surrealist painter, and he was a Surrealist painter. But there were other Surrealist painters who painted differently. What did Ricardo Bofill mean by saying Magritte is more important than Mies. I actually think that in a strange way, perhaps he didn't realize that there is a certain surrealism in Mies van der Rohe as well. Anyway, regardless of what he said, you'll see the works, which are very, very interesting, built in the 70s in Barcelona. For the moment, we are still with Magritte. René Magritte, this is another whimsical painting by Magritte, where a man sees himself in the mirror, but he sees his back. So, you know, in a way, he sees himself from the back. Yeah, he's very good at this kind of things, Magritte. And here we see some kind of strange, surreal viscerality, you know, and deformation, fragmentation of the human being, or the, you know, the human figure. And then this is of course the very famous painting by Magritte, where some birds are within the the body of the man. Anyway, we arrive now at the studio of Ricardo Bofill and Taller de Arquitectura, which is magnificent, and I can only be jealous that I don't have myself such a studio. It's wonderful. It's a cement factory that was transformed into their studio. They were very successful, but also Ricardo Bofill was very rich. His father had a large construction company. And so, you know, well-to-do people from Catalonia, from Barcelona, and look at their office. It's impure, there is history, there is industrial reality, there is art, there are, you know, easels there with sketches and drawings, there are artificial lights, there is everything here. And the power of the archaic power of the industrial parts of the former factory, cement factory, is what adds to the, you know, when you see this building, yes, this building was just transformed into their offices. And it's, you would say, it's you know, there are other factories in the world. Maybe it's not so exceptional compared to, you know, the buildings by Mies, but the truth is the richness of the architecture and you know, the dialectics between nature and the building, and it's mysterious, it's complex. You could say it's a church, it's a castle, it's what is here going on? And look at the interior, you know. You know, you feel inspired to do architecture here. And of course, Salvador Dali was not born from far away from here. And you have a little bit of, strangely, he said, Magritte is more important than Mies, and not Salvador Dali is more important than Mies. You see, there is rust here too, more than at Fansworth house, but it doesn't bother you because the idea, well, the reality of rust and the reality of the passage of time and the reality of the effects of the elements on architecture here are present from the very beginning. In other words, there isn't a perfection that is deteriorated or affected fatally by you know, the workings of nature and of time and of the elements. But this is not the case with Mies. In the case of Mies, because of the perfection of the conception, when there is something affecting that perfection, it looks like you know, a tragedy or you know, a malevolent event. I think it's a very interesting, you know, architecture office, and it's more than an office. It's, you know, they probably also have here, you know, apartments, and anyway. And you will see their architectural work very soon. And what they built at that time is still very valid and very, very interesting. Walden 7. Now you see some blocks of flats that you never saw before. They're this one. Look at this. It was built in the 70s. You know, and you see in the foreground the factory, the house of the criminals, you know, of the criminals who designed. Sorry for the word, but some people think that art is some kind of a crime. Well, we have in the foreground the house of the assassins, of the criminals, and in the background their work. And it's a form of housing that is monumental, is dramatic, is labyrinthical, is a little bit crazy. You should see, you know, images from inside and also from a drone from above that are very, very interesting. Now, you know, Mies didn't use color. You know, Mies, in the name of purity, he rejected other dimensions of life and of art. And I guess, you know, you have a choice, you know. You just compare the Lakeshore Drive apartment buildings by Mies with these buildings. They are very different. This is the view from the top from a drone. It looks surreal, yeah. You don't exactly at first know what is going on here, but I imagine it's the real photograph. Now another housing complex, La Muralla Roja, and well, of course, here also the environment is spectacular and exceptional because of the proximity of the sea. But the housing is also interesting. And so what I'm trying to say is that you can do architecture like Mies, but you can also do architecture that is so very different, like this one. And they are both legitimate. And it's good that the world can accommodate both, and many other ways, like adding Owen Moss, for example. Mies was a great master, without question, but he opened a road, a direction, a way of doing architecture, but I think he also closed it. It's impossible to advance on his footsteps, because on his footsteps, he already achieved the maximum. But you can start from these buildings. These buildings are not, you know, it's not the building is not a dead-end street. Is exactly because of its imperfections, you can connect with it and go further. Unfortunately, Ricardo Bofill himself and his team, Taller de Arquitectura, couldn't go further. This is strange. The way they evolved, in fact, they regressed in France is unbelievable. It's one of the saddest stories of, later architecture. Incredible. How come they did both these buildings, the reddish one and the one on the right? I don't have images with the one on the right, but the one with the pinks and reds is also theirs. And one is called Kafka's Castle. I actually think surrealism could bring some joy and some freedom to architecture. And I think if we connect with surrealism, it could give us some suggestions towards a very special architecture. You have to recognize this. Despite the splendor and the nobility of Mies, here there is a vivacity, there is a joie de vivre, there is you are not inhibited by this building, you know. Maybe the buildings by Mies also are not inhibited because of the high quality, you know, they are uplifting, but I don't know. Here you can be a proletarian, no, and live in behind of one of these windows. It's not so easy to say you can be a proletarian in one of the buildings by Mies. No, they belong to a different kind of society, and I think that's a little bit problematic. Anyway. I only wanted to show you Ricardo Bofill because Bofill declared in a manifesto they wrote in the 70s, which was published in L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui in France, this statement: for us, Magritte is more important than Mies. And I think they were reacting exactly to the limitations inherent in the perfections achieved by Mies. I think this is the last picture, and I think it's a very nice picture. And of course, for us today, the infinite is beyond the horizon of the sea. So, you know, both Mies and Bofill inspire, and Eric Moss inspire in a different way. Architecture is vast. It can be practiced in many ways. Thank you very much. So if you want, we can talk a little bit.